Aaron Thomas here in Black Tulip Studios. Welcome to the first of the Well-Mannered Monsters podcasts, and welcome your co-host, Scalise.
Hey folks, this is Dr. Scalise, and you can just call me Scalise. You don't have to call me doctor. I just say that so that I can appeal to my own authority at times while also mocking it. So hopefully that'll at least be entertaining. Because really it's the accumulation of knowledge and the development of excellence that really matters for whether a source or a person should be listened to, not because they've got some letters behind their names. This is my first time doing this podcast with Well-Mannered Monsters, so I used to do my own podcast, and I'm kind of setting that on the side now, and I'm going to go forward doing this together with my good friend here, Aaron, and hopefully we'll be able to just dive in. I mean, we really just banter and have a lot of fun. I used to be a theology professor, actually ancient Greek and Hebrew, so, unapologetically Christian, and love cryptocurrency. I'm big time into finance, macroeconomics. So hopefully we'll talk about some stuff you like. Hopefully we'll offend you at times, and hopefully we'll be able to offer you some measure of excellence that you think is worthy of your consideration.
Again, my name's Aaron Thomas. I am not a doctor. Background, I pretty much grew up in construction, and during that time started investing in cryptocurrency, developed some pairs trading methods, and now I'm full-time crypto, and enjoying this new venture of producing some material. Like he said, hopefully it's interesting and something you guys will enjoy. So, Scalise, I know we talked about it a little bit before, but I did an interview with my wife last week, and in the video that I posted of that interview, I put a saying at the beginning of it, and that saying said, "Any movement for the common good that has zero room for personal autonomy will fail to produce good that can commonly be enjoyed, and it isn't born from what it declares it intends." In the context of that interview and conversation I was having with her, it was in the context of her losing her job because she didn't take the jab, and it's basically a saying that embodied some thoughts that I had on what was happening through the COVID crisis, and just reflected a concern that I had through this last couple years. Namely the crisis being used to fight against personal autonomy, or to disallow personal autonomy. Sorry, I'm just gathering my thoughts.
Well, yeah, it's a real misnomer. The notion that somehow enforcing or forcing your will on someone else masquerades as this notion as good. Really, it's a matter of priorities. I mean, if you want to think of this as, to me, it seems like a taxonomy, where you're basically elevating a less important good over a higher good. So to me, the idea of being distinct, having autonomy, having individual liberty, to me this seems to be a supremely important, particular moral imperative. It's not something that should be put below my safety concerns for my fellow man. And there's something really sick about that, almost sadistic really, that I'm so concerned about you, I'm going to force you to do something you don't want. I mean, this sounds like something that would come out of a stalker's mouth. I am so concerned for your well-being that I'm going to force something on you that you don't like. To me, that there's something totally mental illness about that, and utterly disgusting. And plus, we talked about this already, but the whole notion of personal autonomy, that just means you have independence from and the ability to act freely against other people's wishes. You're not going to be coerced to do so. That's kind of a fundamental value of the United States, at least let's call it our traditional ethos, as we're seeing our government presently is not what it used to be. But you can't have true societal growth, and this gets into some really deep topics on ontology. How is the nature of human relationships? How are those constructed, and how does the individual person have their identity constructed? So there is no such thing as a non-societal individual, and by that I just mean that every individual is who they are by virtue of the influences of the society to which they belong. So there is no escaping that. To think you can escape that would be to say that you're not going to be human, because every human has existed in such a context. Even if you consider Adam, let's say at the very beginning of time, he still has a context of relationships with God. So even at that very early phrase where there might not be another human on the planet, there's still relationality going on there that contributes to your identity. There is no escaping that. So we're not saying personal autonomy in this radical and false sense that can never be achieved, that you want to be independent of all other influence. That's nonsense, and that is also non-human. But we are saying that you should have personal autonomy to make free decisions about basically your own self-driven and constructed destiny.
Well, and that's like, one of the reasons in the saying, I said, like, any movement for the common good that has zero room for personal autonomy. So, like, obviously there's that consideration that, none of us are fully autonomous. We live inside the context of societies, both broad and, within the family context. So there's, like, smaller and bigger pictures that we fit into. So there's no truly autonomous human being.
That's well, and I think it's right that, like, really trying to drill down on your phrase there, won't produce the common good. So again, this, to me, a matter of taxonomy, right? The common good, the supreme moral imperative would be not, because, really, like, what is slavery? And that's considered one of the most atrocious things ever done in human history, right? So slavery is having somebody else's will enforced upon you against what you would desire, against your own desired behavior. When you really boil it down to that. So, to me, the notion that a government or any other agency, no matter what their moral imperative is, which it's a bunch of garbage anyways, they lie about what their real intents are, but let's just say they really had true concern for my physical well-being, so much so they're going to hold me down and force me to get the death jab or whatever you want to call it, and that's just utter nonsense. And it is a total deprivation of the common good. If we can't agree that a common good is being able to act freely, at least within the context of what I would consider like typical moral behavior. So I'm not saying pedophiles should be able to run around and do whatever they want, right? So we have to kind of give some thresholds to that. But the point is that my own medical choices should be freely up to me. My own decisions over my own physical body, in terms of medical treatments and so forth. Like, if we can't agree that that's a common good that should be achieved, then our society is really in bad shape.
Well, and to the point that, like, it can't produce a common good, or it can't produce a good that can be commonly enjoyed. What I found interesting about how a lot of this progressed, it was very similar to what we've seen over the last, like, decade or more with the Green Movement, where you have these elites or people in power who are preaching and, putting all these various regulations upon the common person. And then, you see them out there, using private jets, running around and big SUVs, pretty much using whatever they want while they're essentially using government and companies combined to control your movements, what products you can buy, and they're free to enjoy all the good things, And then during the COVID crisis, just seeing these various celebrities to government officials at a variety of different events, baseball games, basketball games, various galas, you name it, out in the public preaching, wear a mask, do this, that, and the other. And then behind closed doors or at those various meetings and, places where these important people were gathering together, you saw them without their masks. They didn't seem to have a care in the world. And it's interesting because they put all these regs, rules and regulations upon us, told us this was for the common good. Do this do this. It shows care for your common man, shows care for your neighbor. Like, if you don't do this, then, you clearly don't care. And to the degree to which they actually accused some that they, were Hitler-esque and wanted people to die, that kind of thing, if you didn't follow their rules. But then behind the scenes, they were laughing it up. And just one of those issues you see happen over and over again, where...
It's really an unfortunate capitulation to allowing them to frame the moral framework. And really, and I've said this to you many times, it's something I come back to very often. Whoever can frame a conversation can win a conversation. So whenever they have the bullhorn, they have the big mic by which they can go out there and essentially say, if you don't do X, then you're morally culpable and you're kind of a moral monster. When the vast majority of society capitulates to that or goes along with it, then you're letting them frame the moral fabric of the society, the common cultural space shared in America. And once you do that, I mean, it's just a utter uphill battle. And it's unfortunate that humans aren't willing, especially the church, they're just not willing to look bad. And when you go against the ruling class of people and their moral framework, and they have the main means of mainstream media and almost all of mainstream social media, you're going to have to look and feel like the bad guy. There is no escaping that. And church people notoriously want to feel good and praised and clapped for. And I'm not just blaming the church, but this is across the entire society. But there is a certain amount and maybe it's just Americans haven't faced this before, where you have to feel like the bad guy when your ruling class has become a criminal syndicate. The ruling class has become a criminal syndicate. Going along with what they do is evil, and not going along with what they're doing is good. And that's a really simplistic way of putting it, but that's the entire point. But if they convince enough of the common populace that what they're doing is the best, then you're going to be framed as the evil one, and you got to be okay with that. You got to be okay with that. So, let God be true and every man a liar.
In the beginning, they told us this virus was unlike anything they had seen, and the experts from the CDC and other orgs were put in front of us with data that shifted, on a weekly basis. And like in the midst of that, they were making prescriptions and they were shaping public policy, and like in the midst of that uncertainty, like their own uncertainty, they seem to disallow personal decision making and even the ability to question what was being decided. And
which is more akin to a religious cult or just even a religion. And we covered this before. But, for instance, Islam, one of the real famous teachers of recent years. I did my dissertation, by the way, comparing the Trinity with Islam, so I'm a bit of an expert on it. But they just said it's your duty to obey, and questioning is unacceptable. That's not an exact quote, but I'm kind of making it colloquial for our listeners. But essentially it said, do not question and obey. And that's essentially the same. And that's a very prevalent Islamic, not all Muslims, I'm not saying, and I can't paint with a broad brush, but that was by one of their contemporary, one of their major religious leaders. That's one of his very famous sayings, and it's been held out through Islam throughout history. And so you come to this place where you say they're acting like a religious cult. When you can't question what's being said from the so-called authorities, you are on excessively dangerous ground.
Yeah, I think the wildest thing about it is they didn't even seem to have, they had an issue with you questioning the data, but more than that, they had an issue with you even questioning them, in spite of the fact that they claimed they were following the science. And what I find interesting about that is, just what we know about the scientific method and what that invites, questioning the creation of various hypotheses and just...
Well, and not to be missed in that regard, most people don't have a good grasp on the historicity of Christianity and its relationship to scientific development. But commonly heard is, the Catholic Church was against Galileo, and so they paint this kind of, I'll call it a snapshot, a single photo view of how the relationship of the Christian faith, at least Catholicism, related to science, using kind of Galileo as this figurehead for the example. But really it's Christianity and really theology before that. If you look at the development of theology in Christian history, they considered it a science, scientia in Latin, and it developed over time. And you could go beyond and develop out beyond what Scripture says, not in a way that's faithful to what it says, so within the contours of the boundaries that it lays, but you can actually build upon it and build theology And that blossomed into all the other categories. This is why historically theology was considered the matriarch of the sciences, and that's because Christianity and really the church fathers, their natural curiosity about God and building out knowledge, like big sets of knowledge, right? Not small sets. That blossomed out into all the other fields, mathematics and everything else. And so there is a very rich Christian history here of promoting scientific inquiry, not suppressing it. And so the Galileo thing's really kind of I understand why they do it. It's a very effective marketing tool to get people to think that Christianity and science are opposed to one another, but that's historically just not the case.
Yeah, no, and a lot of, there's been quite a few Christians out there who have helped that narrative along, especially, when it comes to the creation and evolution debates, the contention that's been created there. I think there's certainly a debate to be had there, and we can get into that in a totally different podcast, but some of the contention there that's been created by the Christian, or what's been predominantly Christian side, I think is just, it's been the creation of a problem that I don't think exists, at least in part. There is a problem there, and a worthy debate, but some of where they've taken it, I think, is just problematic. But, like, drilling down into just some of this, the issues they had with their own data up front, whether it was with the masks, vaccines, you name it, the various experts that were put in front of us, from the CDC to you name it, different organizations. I mean, even to this day, they're coming out with different data on what's effective, whether the masks are effective or not. And yet, there was this really hardcore virtue signaling done with just wearing the mask, even though the data on it was something they themselves seemed to have a very uncertain path on. And to not be able to make a personal decision on my own to not wear the mask was just, in the face of that uncertainty, even from their end of it, just, it seemed so wild, just so wild, like what they did, and then what they did bolstered by just the citizens going along with it, businesses going along with it.
And we've discussed this. I mean, the accumulation of power is always going to be played out in an arbitrary fashion, simply because the will to power, the desire to accumulate it basically will take any method necessary to achieve it. And so that'll play out in a very standard fashion as you watch someone or a group of people in arbitrary, inconsistent, illogical ways, because there isn't a logical reasoning. So we tend, at least you and I don't know about everyone, but I tend to look for reasons or explanations for why a group or a set of authoritarians are behaving in certain patterns, so I can kind of achieve some measure of predictability. I can understand their character, I can know who they are, etc. But in this case, they're trying to tell us this kind of consistent narrative. Hold on, hey, I gotta pause for a sec here.
Yeah, no problem.
Where were we at?
Well, we were just kind of breaking down the whole mask.
Yeah, it's art. Yeah, arbitrary. So it's arbitrary. The mask, in my opinion, was always about a symbol implying subjugation or willing submission to a set of irrational medical dictates that masqueraded as having some measure of reason. And at the beginning, they had a very put together narrative. And when I say at the beginning, I'm talking about really early. I'm talking about March through maybe May 2020. You had a lot of, they were well put together. And then as this thing continued to roll on, and they had to continue to try to, and whatever it was probably the interplay between Trump going along with what they want and then Trump not going along with what they want, that created this dissonance that we could see. It became abundantly obvious that masks did not, especially cloth masks, right? These aren't even commercial medical grade masks like they discussed, the N95 mask and so forth. This is just cloth, and it was nonsense. But it was a very effective basically litmus test to find out who are the subservient, willing peasants among the United States people. How freedom oriented are the United States people as a whole? And I can't speak to the rest of the world, but I think as a whole, and I live in Florida in a very DeSantis.
Yeah, and I'm here in Tennessee.
County, and there was still huge amount of mask wearing well after. I mean, we stopped having to wear masks publicly anywhere basically June of 2020. I mean, it's been a long time since I've thought about a mask, but my point is that probably until about 3 or 4 months ago, I was still seeing 30% of people in their vehicles or at the store wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And that's not a great indicator for being in very deep red Florida now, and a very DeSantis-centered county.
Well, and I even tried to be kind of like respectable to some of that data. Looked into it. There's such a back and forth. I think one of the most common things that I actually had people use as an argument for it is, well, doctors, surgeons, and all those people have been using these masks since before the COVID crisis. And so I looked into that. I know some surgeons. I talked to them and asked them what they use those masks for. And one of the interesting explanations, from them, was that it wasn't for particulates that size. Like the COVID virus, this, that, and the other. It was actually, their main use for that mask that they told me was when they're over a patient, you've got a patient, open underneath them, open cavity, open chest, you name it. They put a mask on in order to keep hairs and, globs of spittle, from falling out of their mouth into the wound. And I know that, kind of graphic, but that was the main reason I heard from them. It wasn't to control viral, transmitting viruses like the COVID virus or anything like that. So that one too, I was just they used that as a reason. And so I went to them and asked, and that was their explanation. I was like, so why? At every turn, I looked down and I was so why am I being forced to use this? What's the point?
Well, I just remember, and this is back in 2020, but the most comical one that really gave me a big wake-up call to it, it was pretty early on, was a construction worker who did drywall, wore one of the recommended masks, not an N95, but one of the better ones, right? Not just cloth. And when he got done working with the drywall, his whole face, where the mask was just covered in drywall dust, right? So, and the COVID virus particulates are much smaller than those particulates, obviously. So, the notion that somehow it's protecting you, it's just absurd on the face of it. But, I mean, people will do what they're told, and I don't know where we're at now. I don't know how it is in Tennessee. I mean, how is it in Tennessee? Are there people still wearing masks?
Yeah, there's still a pretty good amount of them. It's lessening in a lot of places, but I don't get a sense that unfortunately, I don't presently have a sense that if there was another shutdown or they decided to ramp some of this stuff back up, I'm not entirely certain that people wouldn't go back to doing all of the crazy stuff we did before.
Well, and what's wild is that the people that are for the mask, I'm talking about the populace, what's wild about it is that it almost exposes them as little tyrants as well, because it isn't even enough that they have the option, because of course this is a free country, or at least we think it is to some extent. You can wear a mask for the rest of your life if you want. I mean, if you feel unsafe, maybe you have a mental illness, maybe you legitimately believe that, even though that the evidence doesn't support it, whatever the reason, you could wear a mask for as long as you like, but that is not good enough. They want to force other people to wear the mask. And that's where the rub comes in, and that's where they, really expose themselves as belonging to the, let's call it the aristocracy, the ruling class in America. And you'll hear me say that often, that they're like an aristocracy, because people want to say that they're hypocrites. What's good for thee is not for me, and you have to do what I say, but I don't have to. But that's not they're not hypocrites. They willingly and actively and blatantly know that they're illustrating two sets of laws, and that is just comparable to the way aristocracy is historically
Well,
acted. And they're not embarrassed by it. They don't think they're hypocrites. They think that this is a right and good adjudication of how rules should work. I mean, they're
well,
not
that seems
though. They're not like, oh, whoops.
that seems to be more on the citizen level. When you get into the celebrity and like governmental level, those guys, I mean, it's been documented over and over again. They clearly don't believe what they're saying. I mean, with the way that they gather, I'm not saying that all of them don't, but the lion's share of the ones we've had in front of us, whether it's Dr. Fauci, you name it, they have declared one thing, and when they're out enjoying themselves, they definitely do another. So that one,
well, right,
like
but
how?
yeah, and I'm just saying they're not.
Well, I
no,
mean,
go ahead.
how? So, and this is, I think, the one that's disturbing me the most is people will ignore that and not use that as a data point to question what they're doing, whether or not what's been told to them is true. And that's the thing. If you're using a set of experts and authorities to guide how you make your decisions, and that data they're giving you and what they're telling you to do based upon that data is not what they're doing, I mean, how am I not to question that? Like, why is that wrong for me to look at that kind of activity and be like, yeah, that doesn't line up, so something's off here. You're either telling me something true, and you simply don't care about the reality of it, or you're telling me a lie, and you're acting in a way that suggests that what you just told me is a lie. Right?
Right. Well, yeah, and this is, I guess, kind of the fundamental flaw of our education system, which has become glaringly obvious in the past 3 years, that it's designed to indoctrinate and program citizens to create compliant citizens, not free thinkers, not critical thinkers. The entire regurgitate as they get older. So there is a place for regurgitating information at very young ages, but there is virtually no critical thinking. And that's what you're bewailing, and rightly so, is that we just have very little, let's call it a rational inference ability. The ability to infer that if it were truly deadly and dangerous not to wear a mask, and it was a moral imperative, as these people publicly state, they would not be behaving in ways contrary to that. If I took my mask off and I knew that there was a virus going around that had a true, like what they were saying originally, not anymore, but originally they were saying that they thought it might have a 10% kill rate. So 1 in 10 people is going to die. You would not be taking your mask off. You're not going to want to risk death. And so as this played out, it just. But that's an excellent illustration, though. What I'm saying is that this is about arbitrary accumulation of power for the aristocracy, and they're unapologetic with it. That's why you hear Sean Hannity. You hear so many different people call them hypocrites, but I just think that's the wrong. You need to call them aristocracy, because you need to expose them for what they're trying to deploy on us. And not identifying the problem is a major issue, because they're not hypocrite. They're not making a mistake. They're not mentally incapable to recognize that they're acting in hypocrisy. That's not what it's about. It's about them doing it and blatantly doing it so that you know that you're a peon and they are not.
Yeah. No, that is something. That's one of the reasons and again, we can go down so many different rabbit trails. Why I'm convinced that his insistence on calling them hypocrites, and I know this might sound crazy, but I'm convinced that Sean Hannity's a part of the controlled resistance.
Yeah, we've thought that many times, and you just, even the well, and by the way, I wanted to give a good call out for the late great Rush Limbaugh, because I think he's the one that taught both of us about the nature of climate concern really being kind of the end-all grand basket for libs, because the environment is what you live in. So if you say you got to protect the environment versus humanity, Rush would always say that basically gives you moral justification for being able to regulate everything. Air, water, right, your house, everything. So I just wanted to give a cry out for that. But yeah, back to Hannity for a second. Yeah, they are, especially Hannity's warmness with liberals, that actively, call for violence and cruelty. It's no longer that these people are kind of civil conversants. That's not where we're at in this country now. And to treat them as though they are your buddy, and of course Hannity gives you enough of a voice to feel like he's making some good points, but not enough of a voice to really identify the enemy. If people are identifying the enemy rightly, you're going to talk about World Economic Forum, New World Order, globalist agenda, Biden being a puppet, so you don't want to actually direct your anger at Biden. That's the miss the point. And you're going to recognize that this is about an aristocracy and not hypocrisy. And that, you have a uniparty in Congress effectively, with the exception of, whatever it is, 5 to 10 people probably, including Trump. But other than that, if you Hannity doesn't do that though. Hannity stays within these, bipartisan lines, as though, like you said. It does. It creates a, what would you say, controlled dissent.
Yeah. Controlled dissent. I think I said controlled resistance, but it's probably better said controlled dissent.
By the way, I did want to celebrate the Florida judge here for a second, just because it's not insignificant that they did just strike down the mask mandate on airplanes and other travel, and TSA has dropped it. Now, there's getting some pushback to that, but this federal judge's name is she's a U.S. district judge in Florida, Catherine Kimball Mizell, out of Tampa, and she was an appointee of Trump, so that's significant. But she's the one that struck it down, and I put quite a few videos up on my Telegram just about people singing on the plane and celebrating when they were told that day that they didn't have to wear them anymore. So we don't get a lot of gems of celebration. So I think that's worth it.
No, it's definitely a good move. I guess I would have preferred just seeing more people do that on their own. But you gotta you gotta take what you can get now, and try not to be I don't know, that one again. Maybe we follow back on that one, because I've got a lot of issues around that particular conversation. But I know. So one of the important things that I wanted to get into with this conversation, I think we've dialed in on it, is just basically this attack that we're watching on personal autonomy and the importance of its preservation. And kind of like one of the next ideas or issues that I ran into when I was conversing with people on the street or people at church, or just wherever I went, I ended up having a lot of conversations that ended up being, leading to disagreement pretty quick. And, one of the biggest things, once it got contentious or led to disagreement, was just this response would out of nowhere come from these people, and they'd be like, well, are you a doctor? You an expert in this field? And obviously, as far as medicine is concerned, and the things related around that, virology, you name it. No, I'm not. But they use this are you a doctor? This, that, and the other to shut the conversation down. And it's one of those fascinating things that I kept running into, where it's just hold on, so I have to be an expert or a doctor or a specialist in a certain field in order to form an opinion? Like a good opinion? That seemed to just fly in the face of information, dissemination to begin with. What's the real point, or one of the points at least, valuable ones, of having experts and doctors and specialists in fields, is to actually be able to glean information from them, and people like me being able to make informed decisions, using their expertise, using their excellence to inform my decisions, my ability to make a clear and hopefully good decision for myself, for my family.
Well, it does cast the entire notion of, quote, informed consent or decisions into disarray, doesn't it? Because if you can't have a public opinion and have public discourse of that opinion, because you actually don't have a PhD behind your name, then of course informed decision becomes a myth. Because if you're saying that I can't discuss a decision because I don't have a doctorate in a particular area of knowledge, then all decisions that are supposed to be quote end quote informed consent or informed decisions just becomes kind of nonsense by and large, and it's totally awry anyways. And we've discussed this before, but I have a doctorate, but I'm not even going to appeal to that right now because it's irrelevant. The relevant point is if you've studied epistemology, that's the domain of knowledge, how we accumulate knowledge and so forth. I mean, at the beginning and end of the day, because I don't have as circumspective or as wide an understanding of a particular knowledge class, doesn't mean that I can't understand degrees and certain thresholds into that knowledge base and have true statements and propositions issue forth from that compared to a PhD person, limited knowledge. And, we were talking earlier about worldview. I mean, there's not a lot of people in the world that have doctorates in worldview, but everyone has a worldview. So it's, it's total garbage. And I mean, everyone has, when I say worldview, I mean a belief system. Everyone has a belief system. Atheist, non-atheist, naturalist, Darwin, it doesn't matter. Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever it is. Everyone's
that's
got
a funny thing.
And not many of them have doctors. So now you can't have public discourse about any worldview issues because unless you have a doctorate, you're not allowed to have an opinion that's publicly discussed. No, that's
I know it's like atheist, Christian. You can't talk about God or whether there is or isn't a God because you do not have this, these letters behind your name. Like same thing. They just pick and choose where they apply it, to shut the conversation down. But the thing that I disliked about that is it's like they totally blow past the value of having experts in our lives. The ability to listen to these people and hopefully make good informed decisions. And I think that's the thing that scares me the most about a lot of this, Scalise, is what I keep running into by and large. And it's not everyone, but it is a really big majority out there. I don't know if personal decision making or any of that, personal autonomy is something they're interested in.
No, certainly not. They're interested in let's call it the will to totalitarianism, or as Nietzsche put it, the will to power. Right. So I mean, you can't if you're interested in maintaining other person's freedom and personal autonomy within the reasonable realms or thresholds, then you can't be a totalitarian person. This is a real interesting area of philosophy, actually. They call it the totalitarianism of the same. Basically, you believe if you're an autocrat, you're a dictator, you believe that everyone ought to have the same will and motives and desires as you. And of course, like most human personality in many ways is creative. It's creative, but it's arbitrary in the sense that it looks randomly put together. So you just end up with this very random dictatorial, you should be the same as me, and I'm going to enforce that. And so that's why they call it the totalitarianism of the same. Because basically when you get totalitarians, want everyone to act, do, and behave in the ways that they believe they should dictate, even though and like we've said, they might hold out different rules for themselves. But totalitarian,
and for the sake of actual progress and exploration and just pushing society forward, personal autonomy again, and repeat, not something that we believe to be the effect that we have on the people around us, the importance of community. We are not suggesting, we're not suggesting that somebody can be purely autonomous. We don't want that. I don't want that. I'm married. By that act alone, I understand that I am better with her, and I'm better with the community that I hang out with, build things with, venture through various ideas, products, you name it. Whatever I'm building, I do that better with a community around. But the need for people to individually be able to explore and the value of that exploration just due to the differences, the beautiful differences of the people around you. You have no idea. It's hard to measure what any individual can do, what they bring to the table. And if if we don't have, to some degree, the ability to exercise personal decision making, you kill a lot of what's interesting and glorious about this life and exploring it, creating things, inventing things, pushing things forward for the betterment of the people around you. There has to be a maintenance of that ability to decide, and I hope we don't make it a common structure in our lives to just shut down anyone who questions that which the authorities declare. It's just...
Well, it's really how the development of knowledge progresses. It's obviously the Socratic method. You question, you understand, and you grow. I mean, I have an incessant desire to, whatever I get into, I just continue to drill down over time until I utterly understand internal mechanics of things. But at the beginning and the end, you're right. Like, the loss of excellence and the loss of being able to listen to excellence is what's at stake here. Because when those people that truly do have grand knowledge compared to mine in a particular domain of knowledge, they tell me, don't question me, it does create dissonance to the extent that I don't even want to listen to much of anything you have to say. And it may be true, and the reason why I'm coming to you is because you have a great measure of excellence. The reason why I might stop and listen to you on this particular matter is because you have demonstrated through getting a PhD perhaps that you have a firm grasp on this, and I hope to take from your knowledge, incorporate it into my own knowledge, and then grow in that respect. But to come at me and say, well, you don't question me, especially when you have glaring inconsistencies, it bespeaks totalitarianism and cowardice at one and the same time. Plus, it makes me disinterested in giving you a hearing whatsoever.
And not to mention, if they are appealing to, like, we are following the science, if we are using science to come to this method as some kind of, basically authoritative realm that they can, what would you say, like a podium they can stand.
Please, you know that.
But that's the thing is,
to me, that phrase, we're following the science.
Is the like the scientific method? Take that for example. If they're declaring they're following the science, and their immediate reaction to somebody is to shut up and sit down, like, listen, just do what we're saying, all while their data is inconsistent, like, is it fair for me to say that no, they're not following the science? Like,
of course, when I hear them say that now, and at one point Dr. Fauci even likened himself to being almost the entire arbiter of science. To disagree with me is to disagree with science, I think he said at one point. It's just like the type of grandeurs of self-delusion there are just incredible. But when I hear that now in 2022, after these past 2 years of paying attention very closely, and you could go through my Telegram channel. I mean, I've covered everything from the PCR test. I mean, I've covered everything to the nth degree. And, all I hear is we're following whatever dictates and behaviors are going to advance our narrative and accumulate or attempt to accumulate more power for us. Although I'm actually getting a little hopeful. I'm almost at a point where it looks like they're trying to advance their narrative to preserve their power. I think we're getting to a point where it looks like they're starting really to lose a grip on the narrative, which is why it's becoming so inconsistent and obvious, even to normies. I mean, I've got people in my family that I would call normies, and even they're starting to notice things. And to me, that's a very helpful indicator, because these are not people that are typically very, very quick to notice these type of things. Might have taken them 2 years, but whatever. If we get there, we get there.
I think our ability to question that which is around, or the things that are around us, I think going to the beginning and like back when the COVID crisis first started, I just remember them coming on and saying, this is unlike anything we've ever seen. That phrase coming out of pretty much every one of their mouths. And then not too long after that, just iron hand, iron-fisted dictates. This, that, and the other. Was something that they declared was unlike anything they had ever seen, which, to be honest, I think that was a lie. But they declared that. And And then I don't have
yeah, it
room.
was a lie.
I don't have room to do my own studying and questioning and figuring out while they declare this is something they've never seen before. It's just that one, how quickly it went there and how willing people were just to, roll over, let their businesses get destroyed. What was it? Like, I forget some of the numbers I saw. It was, more than 20% of small businesses were lost?
Well, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I experienced that. I had a small business at the time, and I lost it. It's one of my few but biggest complaints against Trump was that he went along with that lockdown, which effectively just and I applied for both the PPP programs, and I didn't get it. I didn't get a dime. So you just look at this and you say, well, I mean, again, I don't. Trump has absorbed a huge amount of criticism, took a massive weight on him, and has done huge amounts for trying to restore what made America great. So I am not going to spend a ton of time here, but that was tough to be locked down and lose my business.
And to put like this salt in the wound on that one, you had big businesses like Walmart and a variety of those other chains. Yeah,
Home Depot,
get given like exemption.
Yeah, if you're worth $1 billion or more.
And it's kind of one of those things where if you're looking at that and you're seeing these big businesses are being given special treatment, it's like, so hold on, is the point here to keep people safe, or is this? And I know it sounds conspiratorial by a lot of people, but if you look at tax law, if you look at the various regulations, it seems pretty clear to me that a lot of this stuff is rigged for big businesses to be able to afford to deal with. Small businesses are given a super hard time, and it looked like the crisis at some point got used as this very good reason to give these big businesses the green light, and then crush whatever little competition they might have underneath them. And that is just, it's one of those, like, going to that personal autonomy, like people being able to strike out and to do interesting things. Small business is one of the most, it's one of the wildest places for people to be able to do that, bring their ideas to market. And this crisis was clearly, in my mind, it was clearly used as one of the next steps to squash that, to squash, smaller business individuals being able to strike out and really do something great. But
well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely been the greatest wealth engine in history, and of course, what we've seen now is, this does look very orchestrated. We don't have to get, if you want to get into the deeper conspiratorial underpinnings of all this with evidence, you can go watch Alex Jones or whatever. That's for you. But I mean, it certainly does look like an orchestrated 2 years to basically have a massive growth in corporate power. I saw a chart recently where it's the top 1% now of America. It has a net worth that's greater than, it's something ridiculous, like 88% of all other Americans. It's something.
Do you have any of the numbers on the change over this last 2 years?
Yeah, that one was recent. I just saw that one maybe 2 months ago. But yeah, before that it was. So I think, their net worth. I think it used to be that the top 1% in America had a greater net worth than, I think it was like the top 65% of America. So I think that, basically they just gained like 20% gain on their net worth, while the rest of Americans, many of them probably lost their businesses like me, lost the ability to capture additional net worths. But yeah, your point though, it's just the fact that it looks like it's an orchestrated corporate takeover where they're trying to redraw the global political lines to be centered around corporations making decisions for the world, rather than nation states and their governments
and their people.
And obviously this is illustrated best, and their people, right? The people that are supposed to compose their authority. But it's illustrated best, I think, just in the fact that there are, I think it's called FAFA, and it's kind of this global finance regulatory agency that belongs to no nation, but somehow provides the guidance for all nations to follow. So you got some weird things like that going on. That's been going on for a while, you know.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I think as far as this particular podcast goes, we might be coming to a nice place to end. We might do a part 2 on this one.
Yeah, it's great. I've enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun, and these are all very relevant things. Hopefully, be able to come back to some of the notions about knowledge and excellence. Because you do want people to seek out truth, and you want people to seek out knowledge, and you would love to be able to listen to people with PhDs. Unfortunately, though, the level of corruption and deception that's involved with many of these elitists who also have many letters behind their name is just so great that it's almost the development of discernment at this point is almost an excellence that you should be going after first.
Yeah. Well, and the information that they disseminate should be geared that direction too. If they're following, what they say they're declaring, especially on the science side, then the way that information should be disseminated should very much be geared towards encouraging people to think critically, and to make that critical thinking sharp. And that's not what's happening, and it's dangerous. It's definitely the future that we seem to be building for ourselves right now is not one that I want for myself or anyone.
Well, yeah, it gets particularly dim when you look at obviously the wokeism and CRT and all this other Common Core nonsense they're trying to push into schools. But setting all the kind of radical politicization aside for a second, just looking at the fact of what they're not teaching, whenever I guess they're Zoomers, right? When that generation comes into the workforce, it's not going to be a great scenario for America as the baby boomers leave, who by and large, for all our complaints about the baby boomers, they have been able to accumulate wealth and typically are known to be hard workers. And when they all leave the workforce, and then it's up to Gen Xers like myself, as you move down, and not even trying to be mean to these generations, it's just, you got millennials and Zoomers. The Zoomers, the people in school right now, I mean, if the parents aren't pulling them out, wow, what skills are they really going to have for society? Are we just going to end up with more and more rampant gangs and criminality because people don't have skill sets to offer?
Are you a Gen Xer? I thought we were Gen Zers.
You have to get better.
Are we Gen Xers? I thought.
I'm Gen X. Oh, I'm a Gen X only by about 10 days. You're a millennial. You're a millennial.
Gotcha. That's right.
So, I mean, I know a lot of great millennials though. So
I've
don't
never
get that wrong. It's just
I really haven't kept up with that.
All right. Well, we got to run.
Oh no, this is great. This has been a very good start to the Well Mannered Monsters podcast. Brian, thank you for coming, joining us, and thank you all for joining us too. Cheers.
Appreciate it.